The final edition of the Chronicle lay on my desk, its front page declaring local news papier seed LOCS FTE or 118 years. My name, Eliza Montgomery, editor-in-chief, appeared in the staff box for the last time. After tomorrow, the Chronicle would be just another casualty in the slow death of print journalism, another historic masthead erased by corporate consolidation. At least, that's what my cousin Victoria wanted everyone to believe. I closed the door to my office and pulled out the external hard drive hidden in my desk drawer. 6 months of evidence that would expose how Victoria had engineered the Chronicle's demise from her position as chief financial officer. The newspaper wasn't dying of natural causes, it was being murdered for private gain. My grandfather, Robert Montgomery, had established the Chronicle in 1905, building it from a 4-page weekly into the most respected newspaper in 3 counties. When he passed away 5 years ago, ownership was divided between his children, my father Thomas, who continued as publisher until his stroke last year, and my Aunt Eleanor, Victoria's mother, who had never shown interest in journalism but very much enjoyed the dividends. When Dad's health forced him to step aside, the board named me editor-in-chief based on my 15 years at the paper, working my way up from intern to reporter to editor. Victoria, with her MBA and corporate experience, was appointed CFO, a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. We were family after all. The Montgomery legacy would be preserved through the next generation. Or so I thought. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Advertising rates inexplicably increased for our loyal local businesses, driving several to reduce their placements. Subscription renewal notices sent out late or not at all. Production delays blamed on equipment failures that somehow always affected our most popular editions. It's just the reality of modern journalism, Victoria would explain during board meetings, presenting charts showing declining revenues. Print media is dying everywhere. We're actually outperforming industry averages. I might have believed her if not for the Chronicle's digital metrics that showed reader engagement growing steadily, or the fact that our community-centered journalism had been winning state awards consistently for the past decade. There was still a place for thoughtful local reporting if someone wanted it to survive. As the financial difficulties mounted, Victoria began suggesting cuts, first to freelance budgets, then staff positions, finally proposing we reduce publication from daily to 3 times weekly. These are necessary adaptations, she assured the board, avoiding my gaze. Many local papers have made similar changes to survive. The decisive clue came 3 months ago when I accidentally received an email meant for Victoria from Ridgepoint Media, a national conglomerate known for acquiring local papers, stripping their assets and replacing local reporting with syndicated content. The message referenced post-closure property development options and zoning contingencies for the Montgomery building. Our building, the historic downtown landmark my grandfather had purchased in 1922, now worth millions as commercial real estate, was apparently the actual target. I began my investigation that same day, working quietly with our veteran investigative reporter, Marcus Wong, and our digital editor, Zoe Taylor, the only 2 staff members I trusted completely. What we uncovered was breathtaking in its calculation. Victoria had been systematically undermining the Chronicle's financial viability while secretly negotiating with Ridgepoint, not just to sell the paper, but to liquidate its assets entirely. The development plans are already drawn up, Marcus reported, showing me architectural renderings he'd obtained from a contact in the city planning office. Luxury condos where the newsroom stands, boutiques and upscale restaurants on the ground floor. The timeline matches perfectly with our financial decline, Zoe added, presenting a spreadsheet correlating the Chronicle's performance with Victoria's operational decisions. Every policy she implemented was designed to accelerate failure while maintaining plausible deniability. Most damning of all was the draft agreement with Ridgepoint, which included a special provision. Victoria would receive a personal consulting fee of $2 million and retain a 15% stake in the development project, compensation far beyond her rightful share as a board member and part owner. I had all the evidence I needed, but confronting Victoria directly would be too risky. She had cultivated strong relationships with most board members, positioning herself as the pragmatic businessperson while subtly characterizing me as a nostalgic journalist unwilling to face financial realities. The final board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, a mere formality to approve the sale to Ridgepoint and officially close the Chronicle. Victoria had even prepared a press release celebrating the Montgomery family's difficult but necessary decision, and Ridgepoint's commitment to honoring the Chronicle's legacy, even as they dismantled it. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant Rachel peered in, her expression troubled. "Your father's here," she said quietly. "He's asking to see you." Dad's visits to the newsroom had become rare since his stroke. Though his mind remained sharp, the physical limitations frustrated him, and he had gradually withdrawn from daily operations. Seeing him in his wheelchair in the newsroom doorway, I was struck by how much he had aged in just a year. "I heard tomorrow's the last edition," he said as I wheeled him into my office. "Wanted to see the old place one more time." I closed the door and took a deep breath. "Dad, there's something you need to know. About Victoria, about what's really happening to the Chronicle." For the next hour, I showed him everything we had uncovered: the manufactured financial crisis, the secret negotiations with Ridgepoint, the personal profit Victoria stood to gain from the newspaper's demise. "She's not just selling the Chronicle," I concluded. "She's killing it for real estate development." My father sat silently for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across my desk. When he finally looked up, the grief in his eyes had been replaced by something harder, more resolute. "Your grandfather used to say that a newspaper doesn't belong to its owners," he said slowly. "It belongs to its community. We're just the caretakers." He picked up the draft agreement with Ridgepoint. "This betrays everything the Montgomery name has stood for in this town for over a century." "The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m., I told him. "Victoria has the votes locked up. 7 of the 9 members support the sale." "Then we need to change their minds," Dad replied. "And I think I know how. Call Marcus and Zoe. We have work to do." We worked through the night, the 4 of us preparing what would either be the Chronicle's final story or its salvation. By morning, we had produced a special 4-page section documenting Victoria's systematic dismantling of the paper and the secret deal with Ridgepoint, complete with evidence, timelines, and the damning architectural plans for the Montgomery building. "Print 1,000 copies," Dad instructed. "Deliver them to every business on Main Street, the city council members, and every board member's home. And save one for Victoria." At 9:45 a.m., I stood outside the Chronicle's conference room, watching board members arrive for what they believed would be a straightforward vote. Each one had received our special edition with their morning coffee. Their expressions as they entered ranged from shock to anger to deep uncertainty. Victoria arrived last, her face already flushed with fury as she clutched a crumpled copy of our exposé. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the paper in my face. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted calmly. "I'm the editor-in-chief of this newspaper, and this is journalism. Exposing corruption and holding power accountable, even when that power is family." "This is slander," she hissed. "Ridgepoint will sue you personally for interfering with a business transaction." "Actually," came a voice from behind me, "Ridgepoint has already withdrawn their offer." My father wheeled himself forward, accompanied by our family attorney, Patricia Chen. "I just got off the phone with their CEO," Dad continued. "Apparently they're not interested in the public relations disaster of being seen destroying a historic local newspaper for real estate development, especially when that development involved secret payments to the CFO who engineered the paper's failure." Victoria's face drained of color. "You can't prove any of this." "We already have," I replied, nodding toward the boardroom where Marcus was distributing detailed evidence packets to each board member. "Bank records showing how you diverted advertising revenue. Emails between you and Ridgepoint dating back 18 months. Testimony from staff members who were instructed to implement your sabotage directives. The board will determine the appropriate next steps," Patricia added. "But I should inform you that I've already notified the State Attorney General's office about potential breaches of fiduciary duty and corporate self-dealing." Victoria looked frantically around the hallway, finding no allies. "This paper is dying anyway," she spat. I just had the sense to get something out of it before the inevitable. That's where you're wrong, Dad said quietly. The Chronicle isn't dying. It's evolving. It always has been. The emergency board meeting lasted 3 hours. By its conclusion, Victoria had been removed as CFO, an independent audit of the Chronicle's finances had been authorized, and a new business strategy, one I had been developing quietly for months, had been approved for implementation. The next day's front page told a very different story than the one Victoria had planned. Chronicle Turin's NEUPG. Historic newspaper launches digital-first strategy while preserving print tradition. The accompanying article detailed our plans. A redesigned website featuring multimedia reporting, community-focused subscription models that bundled print and digital access, and a new podcast series exploring local history and culture. Most importantly, we announced the creation of the Montgomery Journalism Foundation, which would convert the newspaper to a nonprofit structure partially supported by community donations. By changing how we deliver the news rather than abandoning our mission, the article explained, the Chronicle recommits to its founding principle, that informed communities make better decisions. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was remarkable. Former subscribers returned, local businesses increased their advertising, and community organizations partnered with us on special reporting projects. The newsroom, which had been gradually emptying as Victoria engineered staff reductions, began to fill again with journalists committed to our new vision. The Montgomery building, rather than becoming luxury condos, was renovated to include a community media center on the first floor, where students and citizens could learn digital journalism skills. The printing press, which Victoria had scheduled for dismantling, was preserved for the reduced but vital print editions while we expanded our digital capabilities. 3 months after what was supposed to be our final edition, I sat with my father in his old publisher's office, reviewing the latest metrics from our digital transition. Paid digital subscriptions up 34% this quarter, I noted, and the foundation has secured grant funding for our investigative reporting unit. Dad nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Your grandfather used to say that newspapers don't just report on communities, they help create them. Victoria never understood that. She saw only the building, the equipment, the financial statements. She never grasped what gives a newspaper its actual value. The trust of its readers, I said. Exactly. He picked up that day's edition, examining the familiar masthead that had nearly been erased. When Robert Montgomery printed the first edition in 1905, he didn't know if it would last 5 years, let alone a century. But he believed this community deserved a paper that would tell its stories honestly, hold its powerful accountable, and help its citizens make informed decisions. He handed the paper to me. That mission hasn't changed, even if everything else about journalism has. 6 months to the day after Victoria's attempted sale, we held an open house for the community to see our reimagined newsroom and media center. Hundreds of readers, from longtime subscribers to new digital followers, toured the historic building that had so nearly been lost. In the renovated community room that once housed our classified advertising department, we unveiled a wall chronicling the Chronicle's 118-year history, from its founding through world wars, economic depressions, technological revolutions, and its most recent brush with extinction. The Montgomery family has shepherded this institution through many challenges, I told the gathered crowd. But the Chronicle has never truly belonged to us. It belongs to all of you, to this community that has sustained it through generations of change. I gestured to my father, seated beside me. Thomas Montgomery taught me that journalism isn't just about recording history, it's about serving the present and safeguarding the future. That purpose doesn't change, even when everything else about our industry does. As the event concluded and people mingled through the building, a young journalism student approached me with her notebook in hand. I'm doing a project on the future of local news, she explained. Everyone says print is dying, that community journalism can't survive, but you found a way forward. How? I considered her question carefully. We recognize that what people value isn't the paper itself, it's reliable information about their community, delivered by journalists they trust. The format matters less than the relationship. So you think local journalism has a future? She asked, pen poised over her notebook. I smiled, watching the energy of the renovated newsroom around us, veteran reporters mentoring young journalists, digital editors collaborating with traditional beat writers, community members engaged in conversation about local issues. Journalism will always have a future wherever people care about truth, accountability, and their neighbors' stories, I told her. The challenge isn't whether local news will survive, it's making sure it evolves without losing its soul. Later that evening, after the crowds had departed, I found myself alone in the newsroom. On my desk sat tomorrow's front page layout, a mix of important local government coverage, an investigative piece on affordable housing, and a feature on a local business celebrating its 50th anniversary. Journalism that mattered to our community, delivered in both pixels and print. Next to it lay a framed family photograph, my grandfather standing proudly before the Chronicle building on its 50th anniversary, my young father at his side. 3 generations of Montgomerys had now guided this institution through times of both prosperity and peril. Victoria had seen only a failing business model and valuable real estate. She had calculated the price of everything without understanding the value of anything. In the end, what saved the Chronicle wasn't just exposing her betrayal. It was recommitting to the purpose that had sustained it for over a century. As I turned out the lights, I glanced at the illuminated Montgomery building sign that still crowned our historic home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new ways of fulfilling our mission in a changing media landscape. But the essential work remained the same: bearing witness, giving voice, and serving the community that had entrusted us with its stories for 118 years and counting. That trust, I reflected as I descended the same steps my grandfather had walked, was the true Montgomery legacy, not the building, not the masthead, but the covenant between a newspaper and its readers. Victoria had tried to liquidate what she saw as a dying asset. She never understood that what she sought to destroy wasn't just a business, but a public trust that no balance sheet could possibly measure. And that, I knew as I glanced back at the newsroom one last time, was the story that would continue to be written, one day and one byline at a time.